Now that we have the endpoint working and we adding the emails to ConvertKit, that is great. That's one part of the functionality, but we also need to make sure that the user know that the request is pending when it comes back with an error, or just show the success message when it's successfully done. Okay, for this piece of functionality, we could manage it on our own. We could use the React useState and turn the isLoading on at the start of the request, then turn it off when the error comes back, or successfully when it's completed. So we could manage 3 pieces of state ourselves, and there's nothing wrong with it. But I wanted to show you how to use the mutation from React Query, and React Query will handle all this for us. React Query is a data fetching library, but also has a cool mutation part of it, where we can pass it a function to the mutation. So let's go to the mutation. We can pass it subscribe function, and then it will update the status, data, error, is loading, is success for us. So we don't have to, during the progress of our mutation, in our case, our subscribing, we don't have to manually update it. It will be done using React Query. Okay, so you'll see that how just simple few lines of code will simplify the component code for us, and we will still be able to show the right parts of the UI at the right time. So let's firstly install a React Query. Go to the installation. Here is the command npm install React Query. Quite straightforward. And once we do that, we will restart the server, and now we can import it. Okay, ignore the warning from the npm. We don't have to fix this. And yarn dev restarts the server. Let's go back to the documentation and see the exact command, how to destructure it, how to import it. And here it is, import useMutation from React Query. Okay, so let's do that in our component. And now we are able to use this mutation, or pass the subscribe function to this mutation. React Query will intercept it and will handle all the loading state and success state for us. Okay, so let's remove the hard code. It is loading. We don't need it anymore. We'll have it managed by the mutation. And just above the on submit, we will destructure the useMutation. And firstly, it will give us, or we'll need to use the mutate function and pass it instead of the subscribe. Okay, so when we're submitting the form, we're not hitting directly the subscribe function. We will pass the data to the mutate function from the useMutation. And then we can destructure also the is success, is loading, and is error. And we need to pass in the arrow function and the subscribe function. Okay, so we try to keep the same flow of the data. We want to make sure that the mutate gets the data from the form, passes it to the subscribe, and it all continues to the API endpoint. Okay, so we try to keep it exactly the same. That's why we need to pass it to the useMutation like this. And now this should all work. One thing we need to fix is the loading. Is-loading is used to generate the classes for us, and it will complain that it's used before it's declared. That's why we will move the classes under the submit function, on submit function. Now it's declared over here, and we can construct the classes based on that. Okay, so that's where we're using Tailwind to create different classes or apply different classes while we're loading. So let's go to the browser, clear everything up, fill in the email. And before I hit the sign up, I will also change the speed of the network to slow. So just we see the loading state for a little bit longer. And there it was. Everything was grayed out and the button was faded out as well. So we've got it nicely working. Now let's only show the success message when we get the is success to be true by the mutation. So at the end of the request, when we get the correct 201 from the endpoint, the is success will be set to true. And at that moment, we want to return the success message. We will do it as an early return statement. So if is success is true, we want to return this component. So we'll take it out of the main return statement. And now we should be able to not see it by default and only see it on successful request. Okay, so block. I hate tomatoes. You know my email by now very well. Let's hit the button, and on a successful submit, we'll see the success message. Okay, so that success message works as well. Now let's do the error message from the server too. Let's go back to the code, and we already did destructuring isError, which will return trues or false based on what we get from the subscribe response. But at the moment, it would always return some response. We want to make sure that when the response is not okay, we will manually throw a custom error. And this will update the isError boolean to true if the response from the API is not okay. Okay, so then at the bottom of the file, we can have another conditional rendering of the error message component, this time based on the isError boolean. And we will pass in error, which is the message that we'll need to destructure as well. So isError only gives us true or false, and error is the actual error thrown by the mutation. Okay, so we'll pass the error to the message, and we will destructure it from the useMutation. So just remember, the error gives you the string of the error, and the isError is the boolean true or false. Okay, so then if we break the API, if we go back to the subscribe.js, remove s and hit a wrong endpoint, and we should be able to see error returned in the UI if something's wrong in the API. Okay, so again, hitting the submit button, we should see quick loading and then error thrown back to the front end saying that there was an error subscribing to the list. Now we are handling both the front end side validation, the API validation, showing the error to the user. This looks pretty good. We're very close to the finish line. The last remaining bit is we need to reset the form or reset the mutation after we successfully submit it. So let's don't break the API. Let's fix it and make it forms. Now when we make successful request, on successful submit, we want to make sure the user can go back to the email just in case he wants to submit with multiple email addresses. But we want to make sure that there is some UI that will clear everything up and show the form as well. And for that, I'll just copy and paste and we'll walk through it. But essentially what we want to do, we will get a reset function from the mutation. And once we click on a button, we'll run this reset function that will turn the isError, isSuccess, everything to false, everything to the default values, which will then render the form again. So let's go back to the code, and from the useMutation, we'll get a reset. Now we want to pass this reset to the success message. Handle reset will run the reset from the mutation, which, as I said, will turn everything to true or false or the default values, which means that everything will return back to normal. And now we need to, inside of the success message, accept the handle reset. And run it when we click on SVG icon. Okay, so now I'm just copy pasting the content, the updated content of the success message. I just wrapped everything in a span and including a button that on click handles the reset. Okay, so it should be pretty straightforward. If you followed me from the start, we've got only few Tailwind CSS classes and new icon, which I need to import. And the cross comes from, we need to import cross from the icons folder. Okay, so this should be in the icons folder. Now we're bringing the cross and putting it inside of a button that handles the reset. And the last bit we need to do, we need to make sure that the text and the icon or button sit next to each other. Therefore, for that, we need to give the whole container inline flex. Okay, that will make sure that these two spans are next to each other. And that should be it. Now we should see a closing icon when we successfully submit it. So let's see if everything went well. Any errors? No errors. That's good. A good sign. Always good sign. No errors. Submit it. Here is the success message with a button. And when we click on it, we should see the form back again. Okay, so that internally resetted the isSuccess to false. And now we're seeing the form again. And I think that wraps it up. The last remaining bit, really the last one, is actually for me the loading state. Let's go back to the code. And one of the classes is actually not correct. In Tailwind CSS, if you need to load or include a class based on the other condition, so we've got isLoading, we want the border to be light, but at the moment it's always rendering the dark one. Okay, so we need to take this dark border and make it conditionally rendered only if the isLoading is not true. So by default, this will be the value. And then when we are loading, we want to not to make it the same as background, but we want to make it 200. Okay, just to make it obvious what this is doing, I'll change it to red, and you'll see how it's changing from this border as a default value to this border while we are loading. Okay, before it was always rendering this border regardless of the loading state or not. And now we should see it conditionally rendered while we're loading. And there is the red background or red border. Okay, so hopefully you saw that. And just so you know, if you need to render two classes based on the opposite condition, you need to break it up like this in class names. Now let's recap what we've done in this video. It was quite a lot and quite a lot of important functionality. We brought in useMutation from React Query, and we are now using it to manage the state for us, the isSuccess, isLoading, and isError. And we've changed the onSubmit to fire a mutate function from the useQuery or useMutation and passing it the same data. Then the useMutation passes this data to the subscribe function. Then it hits the ConvertKit API, or firstly our API endpoint, which then goes to ConvertKit, gets the response back. And if the response is anything else than okay, we are throwing manually our own error that then sets the isError to be true, and the error becomes our thrown error. And then we are using this to conditionally render another error message and passing it the message coming from the mutation. Okay, so we have two error messages. One is the client-side validation, one is the API failed call. And then we've also changed the isSuccess. When the isSuccess is true, we yearly returning the success message, and we passing the handle reset to reset everything back to normal. If we click on the button, we are resetting everything, making sure that everything from the mutation is reset back to default values, which then in return shows the form as it was originally in the markup. Okay, so hope that makes sense how the useMutation from React Query helps us to manage the different states of the request and how we are then updating the UI based on that.